Set to go.
Oh, welcome in, Chelsea Cordes. How are you, sir? Glad to have you aboard, as well as anyone who may be listening to the Basketball by Association podcast. Your BbA, Joe Cordes.
I'm really ready to talk some hoops. As always, the NBA just keeps piling on the news and the storylines for us. But before we begin, because I know that longstanding listeners, whether you are on the YouTube channel, and we thank those of you who are, or if you're an audio-only person, you're hearing us through Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, please come on over, join the video version on YouTube. Even if it's not your normal place you watch, at least give us a like, a share, subscribe. We could really use it and appreciate it. But I know longstanding listeners will be very interested to hear who wore number 65 in NBA history. I just know you're on the edge of your seats, to take the old saying, we'll sell you the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge. This, Arky Shea, is the George Ratkovitz episode. The one and only person in NBA history. He played power forward for the Syracuse Nationals. That's actually the only reason I'm really excited about this, because I think this is our first national ever on the show as far as an episode being named after them. But George Ratkovitz, the only person in NBA history to wear number 65. He was a 6'6" power forward, had 6 years in the NBA. In the very beginning, his first season, 1949. So we're talking like the early genesis of the NBA.
Joel, you know, when we first started this podcast, even the idea of it, like I said that at some point we have to get to the George Ratkovitz discussion. We had to get there, and it took enough episodes to get there. And I just feel blessed that we finally are here.
It may be the only reason we've continued to do episodes of this show, right? Just to make sure that we get to 65. I think we can probably hang them up right now.
Yeah, I think this is it. I think this is the last pod, to be honest with you. Like, there is nowhere else to go but down. Right. To be honest with you. Joel, let's just start at the top. We're going to have a very interesting Eastern Conference Finals, aren't we? We have the Milwaukee Bucks taking on the Atlanta Hawks, just like we previewed and we talked about right before the playoffs started. Let's run it up first with Game 7 from the Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers. Lot to get into if we want to, but I feel like there's a lot of discussion around Ben, I don't shoot in the fourth quarter, Simmons, and rightfully so. What's a disastrous ending for Philadelphia in this series, for Atlanta to take 3 at their home place, for Ben Simmons to shoot 0 times at all in the last 4 games in the fourth quarter, only 3 times the entire series? Joel, this is not the way we thought these Philadelphia 76ers would be, especially against this Atlanta Hawks team.
First of all, credit to Atlanta. We talked almost 2 weeks ago at this point about how overmatched they were talent-wise on paper, but as time went on, maybe that, assessment was completely wrong. They continued to attack from lots of different angles. They were plucky. They were active. They ran the ball a lot. They got down the court. They continued to find ways, and I guess this is the difference between Trae Young and Ben Simmons. Trae had really good defense played on him throughout almost the entire series, including by Ben Simmons, who did a great job of making Trae Young work. But Trae continued to find ways to be aggressive and contribute. And the threat of Trae Young is just as great as the reality of Trae Young. And we saw a guy who, coming into these playoffs, we had major questions about Trae. There had been that shadow kind of following him of, okay, he gets stats, but is he really a winner? Can he make winning plays? He had started to answer a lot of those questions under Nate McMillan during the regular season, but still it was going to be playoff time, right? And that's different. That's different timing. And he's made the right plays. He's made winning plays. He's gotten the ball out of his hands when he needs to, but having a feel for the game to know, yeah, I could pass this shot up, but I'm Trae Young. My team needs me to go take the next shot. And that has been the huge difference. And you know me. I'm typically a player apologist, right? Usually I'm the good cop, you're the bad cop in these type of things.
Kyrie Irving.
Right. But Ben Simmons deserves all of the shade that he's getting out of this because look, you were
$30 million. He's a max guy.
Right.
He is a max contract guy that's unwilling to shoot in the fourth quarter at all.
And
especially when there's a ball, you're at the net.
That's the one. That's the one open? Right there. If you're not going to play the jumper game and you're not going to drive to get fouled and you're going to set guys up, but you have a point blank look and you have essentially become a post up guy, but you won't post up and you won't go for, just putbacks or whatever. Like, you had a great look and you're 6'8", 6'9", whatever it is, with a lot of athleticism point blank, and instead you pass it off baseline to a half open guy who happens to be the worst shooter on your team, even worse than you are, Ben Simmons. Matisse Thybulle is like an all defensive guy. I love watching him play, but he is a horrible shooter at this point in his career, and you are point blank at the basket. Like, that's the microcosm of everything that you mentioned. And not only is he a max contract guy, but the Philadelphia 76ers believed coming into this season that they had two superstars. They won the number one seed because of two superstars and a very good supporting cast. They don't have two superstars. They don't. And now it's time to go out and get that second guy.
And it seemed like, remember when the discussion was that Philadelphia wouldn't go after James Harden because they wanted Ben Simmons. They liked the two superstars they had. Yep. That they wouldn't even sort of get past preliminary discussion about James Harden coming to Philadelphia. And we can talk about him in a minute because he didn't have a great Game 7 either.
Right.
But he at least shot the ball, right? Like, Ben Simmons is. I hate to just continue to crap on a guy who's gotten all of the national vitriol ever since last night, especially hardcore, since he didn't go for that. Would have been an easy put up. I just can't look at it any other way. Like, Joel Embiid can do everything in the world he can, but he can't do it alone. And when you get opportunities for the easy baskets in these defensive series, when these two teams were physical, they were going after each other. It was a great fun series to watch. Yeah, and it was a series that Philadelphia seemed, especially in Game 7, like every possession was going to be crucial. Like, they needed good offensive possessions, and you got a great offensive possession. You got a great look, and that guy didn't even think about it. Look, Joel, when you go back and look at it, like, and watch, I'm sure people have done it dozens of times. He didn't even think about it. Like, he didn't even it wasn't even like a I got the yips, or it wasn't there's going to be Thybulle's right here. Like, give him a shot. Like, it wasn't even like somebody could be coming from behind or to the side. Somebody's closing out. No, it was immediate. I'm not here for the fourth quarter offense. I'm here for the fourth quarter defense at best. And you
want to be the lead defender on a team and be a facilitator. There's a role for you in the NBA, but not $30 million role.
No,
that's what it comes down to, right?
You need every bit of offense you could have gotten in that game. And that was a game that there were a couple possessions down. They needed it. They needed it bad. And the thing is that I know there were a lot of people immediately talking about, like, just figuring out that he's not a max guy. He's not a max guy. You gave him a shot. Even Doc Rivers was asked after the game. He was asked, do you think you think he win a championship? I think with Ben Simmons.
Is he the starting point guard for a championship team?
That's right.
Yep.
Is he the starting point guard or a championship team? And Doc Rivers didn't really hesitate much and said, I don't really know the answer to that question. Now, he's walked it back a little bit today, but like, that's a guy who's clearly seen enough Ben Simmons to say, probably not. Not the starting point guard spot. No.
Here's the really damaging part to this is if this series had been 2 years ago and we were saying Ben Simmons can't shoot, Ben Simmons can't do this, he can't do that, it hurts the team. You would still have the optimism that did exist 2 years ago.
It did.
Going, yep, he'll figure it out. He just needs to get in the gym. Bad shooters come in. Look at Jason Kidd. Look at guys like that. It took them a while. They figured it out. We're 2 years down the line. Ben Simmons is no better of a shooter than he was previously. And the lack of motor, the lack of understanding to be a winner, which again is just a huge Stephen A. Smith level cliche, and I hate to use it, but in this case, there's validity, because what was the knock on Ben Simmons when he was back in college? He deferred to a bunch of guys who were worse than he was, because almost everybody around him was worse than he was. He put up some decent stats.
He was the number 1 overall recruit in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. He showed plenty of talent, but his teams didn't win.
No,
there was major concerns about what his motor was like. And, the nearest the nearest comparison that I can think of right now is where Andrew Wiggins was prior to this season, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of talent. Nobody questioned it. And Wiggins had a chance to be the second wheel in Minnesota and flamed out. And then you put Wiggins in a different situation where he's the third or fourth wheel in Golden State with a little bit more of a veteran supporting cast around him. You go, oh, no, I can see it. Like, he belongs in the NBA. He's not a washout. He's got value. He's just not a max guy and your second wheel. And that's, I think, what just got exposed with Ben Simmons, unless he comes out and proves everybody wrong. But he's had years to do that now, and he may just be what he is, which is one of the most unique players in the NBA. But because of that lack of shooting in this modern league, he's going to be a guy like a Rajon Rondo, where you got to struggle. There are certain teams that are going to go, nah, he doesn't fit here. We just can't use that.
And that's the thing. Like, first of all, he was your point guard on Trae Young this series. I mean, guarding a guy 9 inches is shorter, by the way. And doing look, Trae Young didn't have a good game 7. I mean,
and Simmons got plenty of shots that were rearranged or turned tough, or he got a couple blocks. Like, he did his job on that end.
Yeah, it's just that guy's making $30.5 million. And if you want a $30.5 million guy that's going to block a few shots and sort of be a stickler on defense for you.
And he did get 13 assists and 8 rebounds, right? So there was production elsewhere.
It's just not. I don't know. So when I was approaching the conversation a moment ago about people talking about wanting to on social media trade him, get rid of him, blah blah blah. It's like I started thinking about A, where does he fit? B, especially with what he does, and B, like, you can't just absorb salary like in baseball or something. Like, you have to basically go contract for contract. You have to have an offset, and that's a lot of money to eat up. So if you wanted to move him, it's not impossible. It's just, I don't think you're going to have a ton of suitors. You'll probably have a few.
If I'm the Sixers, the first team I'm calling up, although there's a domino that's got to fall first, I'm calling the Wizards first, because if the Lakers truly are trying to get Russell Westbrook, which is a big rumor circulating right now, and Westbrook goes because Scotty Brooks is gone as the coach of the Wizards, then it's trade Brad Beal time. And if the Lakers are acquiring Westbrook, they're giving up some of their younger guys, and the Wizards would be stupid not to get rid of Brad Beal at this point, because they're not going anywhere. But to get a young guy like Ben Simmons, who does have a lot of skill and a lot of upside left, and you can dial back the expectations quite a bit and see what happens over a year or two. I look at other teams that are kind of on the rise and in transition periods. Golden State's going to have stuff to figure out with various players, Kelly Oubre being the big one, although I don't think an Oubre for Simmons swap is exactly what the Sixers would have in mind. You'd have to sweeten that pot a little bit. But I'd look at Minnesota too, who's got some duplicity at certain positions. They got to figure out how D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, and Malik Beasley all fit together? And the answer is at least one of those guys has to go. And there's other young players and other young picks or other picks that are available. And Minnesota would be a team that, again, could take a flyer on a young guy like Ben Simmons and really look at it as an upgrade. But I'm not probably putting Ben Simmons on a veteran-laden championship win-now team because he's got that much growth yet to do.
Yeah, and Joel, I just looked up his contract. $33 million next year. 35, 38, 41.
Right.
And listen, I know the contracts are even starting to get a little bigger. Luka's contract's going to be just stupid crazy whenever it's time for him to sign in that extension. But like, just not mentioning it, just a couple years ago, he was an all NBA team guy, right? That's the reason he's making this much money. Like, I think he was a third team all NBA guy. This, like you said, this is not a give up on the kid guy. Like this is just you're an interesting fit right now, and now we're going to try to. We got to find a role for you that works. It may just not be starting point guard on a team that's trying to win a championship. So.
And Doc Rivers is not a developmental coach.
No.
He's never been. And for a young guy who's not ready, Rivers is gonna go like the Tom Thibodeau route, where he's gonna be in the GM's office, in this case Daryl Morey, probably 5 hours a day, going, what do you think about this veteran? What do you think about that veteran? I want this guy. I want that guy. What do you think about him? And Simmons is going to be one of the sacrificial lambs. And here's the other thing. They've got two other guys at the point guard spot who showed that, no, they're not as good as Ben Simmons, but they give you some offensive punch. And if you can swap Ben Simmons out and maybe even Tobias Harris as well, if you can swap those guys out, you don't lose a ton of sleep going into next year with Tyrese Maxey, Shake Milton, and George Hill in a timeshare, with the best player being one of those young guys coming out on top after you kind of shake it out during the regular season. Like, you don't feel terrible about that. You've got depth at that position that you don't necessarily have elsewhere.
I saw a funny thing that someone pointed out that Clint Capella is going to make the Eastern Conference Finals, but Daryl Morey, his new team, and the Philadelphia Sixers will not.
That's pretty good. And James Harden won't either. Of all the Rockets. So
let's love up some on the Hawks just a little bit, because they did win the whole series and did win 3 in Philadelphia. It was a show out game for Kevin Huerter, and let me just ask this real quick. How much credit do you think for this run should Nate McMillan get? That guy came in when the team was, I think, 10-9. Mm-hmm. Atlanta was underachieving in what they thought, the ownership's mind. So they made the move. Lloyd Pierce is out. You bring in Nate McMillan, and now they are just on this trajectory where, like, they have not been in a super long time, and everyone has doubted them from the first series on.
And there was supposedly some friction at that time between Trae Young and John Collins. Collins is a free agent.
Yeah.
And it wasn't being displayed as animosity, but maybe they were just annoyed at each other or whatever. It's hard to tell. The injuries have continued throughout the season. You think of all the time that Bogdanovich and Huerter missed some time. Cam Reddish has hardly played. DeAndre Hunter has been in and out of the lineup and now is gone for the rest of the year. So there has been lots of hurdles for them to climb, and they've done that. And I think McMillan has found an identity for them, right? An identity that goes just beyond Trae Young. And I'd be interested in one of those deep dives on whether the X's and O's really changed under Pierce. And maybe it's a summertime podcast episode. Somebody will get one of those guys on,
Well, something changed because essentially since the All-Star timeout, but even a little bit before then, like, Atlanta's had the best, the second best, point differential, mm-hmm. in the league. They've been one of the best defensive teams, oddly enough, in the league as far as points per games allowed and field goal percentage. Like, they have found something there that I did not expect. I think we all came into this season thinking the Hawks had a chance to be okay,
they were expected to be a playoff team, but a lower seed.
Right, and for them, they battled their way into the 5th seed, right? It's not all because they started off 10-9. They still had to play another 50 games, and they weren't the best, but they got hot at the right time. The last 2.5, 3 months of the season, where they were really, really getting into stride, and now in the playoffs, I mean, they looked great against New York and against Philadelphia to do what they did on their home court, starting from game 1 of that series. I mean, it has been truly an eye-opening experience to watch the Hawks.
And the parallel I see with the Hawks is similar to what I've seen with the Suns. And what has made those two teams especially dangerous in this playoffs is the ability to attack you from so many different angles and have reliable options out on the floor at least 4 of the 5 positions, but more often it's 5 out of the 5 positions are reliable guys who are doing their job. They're active. They're not standing around. There's plenty of shooting on the floor, but aside from standing in the corner, sometimes John Collins is not really a floor stretcher, right? But he's still found a role as a guy who's attacking the basket. They put the ball in his hands. He's been great flying in from the weak side and getting dunks or putback dunks. They've found that role where he can fit. Clint Capella continues to do Capella things, which is just stand in the dunker spot, wait for that lob, set good screens, and then go play good defense on the other end. But anytime you fall asleep on one guy, or the fact that you have to go double Trae Young so often, Young gets the credit for being the proper trigger man and being unselfish, knowing when to get rid of the ball. Again, he was 5 of 23 in game 7. And yet you would say, not just because they won, Trae Young had a very effective game, right? It's the same thing that you see with the Suns. You got Chris Paul and Devin Booker, who both can score in their own ways, Booker especially, who we'll talk about later. But they both have been unselfish. They're finding guys, but it's the activity of the other guys on the floor. Mikal Bridges running in from that weak side. DeAndre Ayton playing the dunker spot and the Capella role, setting good screens. And Ayton's got a little more of a jumper too. So teams have struggled with that. And you look at the opponents they've faced, teams that had like 1 or 2 options that they had to force feed through. The Sixers were so dependent on Joel Embiid. The Nuggets, so dependent on Nikola Jokic. Sixers had other options, but Simmons just disappeared and wasn't one of them. Nuggets were battered in their backcourt and really didn't have a lot of other reliable options from those spots. The Dallas Mavericks had to play so much through like Luka, not necessarily through other guys, especially if Tim Hardaway Jr. wasn't playing well, for example. That was a Clippers matchup with the Mavs. But we've seen it like with the Bucks too, and with the Nets. How reliant have those teams been on their 1 or 2 guys? And everybody else has been a little bit or very shaky through the playoffs, whereas the Hawks starting cast and their supporting cast has generally been ready to answer the call on both ends, and that's been the Suns too. And there's too many people to keep track of on the court, and that's how they're beating teams.
No, Joel, and I think if you sort of don't mind me sort of saying so, I've been, and we could put a row on them and go on to the next series. The fact that Philadelphia had Atlanta dead to right and was smothering them in game 6 and choked that ball game away.
Same way the Jazz choked it away against the Clippers, right? Very reminiscent in a lot of ways.
You've mentioned before, like the hardest thing to do is to close out a team. And I felt very good that Philadelphia was going to close out game 6.
I did too. I thought they were going to win game 7 through most of 7 as well, until like the last 3 minutes. And they're like, I don't think they're getting this.
Yeah, because I think in the last 3 minutes, I think they went down like 4 or 5. And I think that's when the Ben Simmons thing happened. You're like, well, that someone doesn't seem like they're ready to win. So, very good job by the Hawks this postseason, which sets up for a very interesting series, as we predicted. The Milwaukee Bucks, who had their own drama in Game 7 against the Brooklyn Nets. Joe will eventually, maybe starting on Wednesday, probably talk about the Hawks and Bucks series as that one sort of unfolds for the ECF. James Harden, not a great Game 7, but James Harden, I feel like it's fair to say that he's also a bit banged up and hard to completely be mad at him. But
you could see it, yeah.
But in postseason, Game 7s especially, this has kind of been the book on James Harden too. 5 of 17s and those kind of numbers, and teams he's playing on missing the first 22 threes or something in a game. It's not uncommon. But Kevin Durant almost single-handedly pulled them through Game 6 and Game 7 to be able to possibly win this series and move on, because they have not had Kyrie for a while now. The Bucks get the win. They get back to the Eastern Conference. Let me ask you, are you more impressed that the Bucks were able to do what they did against Brooklyn, or are you more disappointed that Brooklyn wasn't able to do more against the Bucks?
The Brooklyn Nets, for most of the series, outworked the Bucks, and the Nets deserved to win that series. They dealt with the injury issues, as you mentioned.
Wait, let me stop you real quick.
Yeah.
Can I say that I agree with you? I think both teams played well enough to win this series. I don't think this was one of those, like, since Game 2 when we started, complaining about the points in the paint, what Milwaukee wasn't. I think both of these teams deserve to have it. I wasn't mad that one of these two teams won the series because I'm
mad that the Bucks did. I'm mad that the Bucks. I do not believe, and I wanted Milwaukee to win.
You wanted them to win, and you're mad that they won.
Yeah, because of the way that it happened. Like, they did not deserve to win that series. If they had played the way that they did, and Kyrie and Harden were healthy, it would have been a 4 or a 5 game Nets win in the series. Like, we talked ad nauseum about Antetokounmpo's offensive struggles. Despite the fact that, you can drop 40 points and 13 boards, and we're still left wanting more.
Since going down to nothing, I mean, he was money. He was money offensive production wise, numbers wise,
right? But not eyeball test wise.
Fair.
And the fact that Drew Holiday, for 7 straight games, essentially pooped the bed, although he did have a couple big plays here or there, like some very critical makes down the stretch for them. And I'll give credit to the guy to keep shooting, right? He kept going through it, and you hope at some point he stops this Eric Bledsoe impression and gives the Bucks the point guard they thought they were going to be getting. Brooklyn outworked them. I just, the shout has to go out not only to Blake Griffin early in the series, but Bruce Brown throughout the series. How many offensive rebounds and possessions were kept alive by Bruce Brown, just sticking his nose in there, despite the fact he's 6-7 inches shorter than all the big boys in there. And how many times was it Bruce Brown alone under the basket, and Brook Lopez is down there, and Antetokounmpo is down there, and it's still Brown coming away with the rebound. Like, to me, that was the epitome of the Nets, who we thought were flashy, and they weren't working very hard throughout the regular season. They showed some things during this series. And Durant showed some things as a defender again. And James Harden was locked in defensively while he was very much hampered on the offensive end. James Harden battled on defense, and Kyrie Irving, before he got hurt, battled on defense. And if Joe Harris is able to hit a couple of extra shots, and Harden is able to hit a couple of extra shots, the Nets advance. And they just didn't. And that's the way that it goes. On the Bucks side, I don't want to just throw shade. I want to give credit to 2 guys who really stood out in Game 7 and saved that game and that series for the Bucks. And number 1 for them is Chris Middleton, who 9 of 26 from the field, not great. And he struggled offensively through a lot of this series. And he walked into some really bad ISOs throughout this series. But Chris Middleton's defense and his hustle was Bruce Brown level. Like, what Brown was doing on the boards, Chris Middleton, I had never seen him defend like that before. And he got switched onto Durant. He got put on Durant one-on-one. He came flying out of nowhere on multiple occasions when the Nets tried to fast break, and Middleton saved fast breaks by playing the safety route, or the safety position. And Durant still got his 48 points or whatever it was. But he was 17 of 36. And a lot of those misses came not against PJ Tucker, not against Giannis Antetokounmpo, but they came against Middleton. And he worked his tail off. And I thought he was the difference maker and the X factor for them. And then Brook Lopez had a lot of really heady plays. He had only 19 points, but he had 4 blocks. And a couple of those blocks were huge momentum savers. They just came at very timely moments, and Lopez is not known as much of a shot blocker, but he was there in the right place at the right time, and those were the 2 guys that honestly saved the day for Milwaukee.
And I'll just come back at you just for one moment about not wanting and thinking Milwaukee deserved to win that series. Like we mentioned, I think on the last pod, or maybe it was the pod before that Milwaukee had a legitimate shot to have already won the series in 5 games, maybe 5 games, because but the boneheadedness of the coaching and play as well. I mean, you can't just sit there and say, "Hey, it's Mike Budenholzer's fault." Every single thing. Like Giannis has to, not just go iso ball for some reason. By the way, not do fadeaway jumpers against James Harden in the post. I thought because of the way this series sort of battled out, Milwaukee felt like a better team as its completed state right now, because
on paper, yes,
because Brooklyn had a no Kyrie and a limping James Harden, and you need to hit Kevin Durant to play hero ball to get you for the game 7, and
Jeff Green wasn't fully healthy either. I mean, he came back, but clearly was not himself. Yeah.
So game 7, Kevin Durant trying to do it again, and listen, James Harden, the numbers again, if you just want to look box score, almost had a triple-double in that game. But he did not play like he was having a triple-double type game. And I think the fact that Milwaukee survived the end of that game where Brooklyn tied it, and then because that game was so defensive and so I guess you would say, or like you were mentioning how Brooklyn was sort of all over the place defending. I think it was 2-2 with like 2 minutes to go, like scoring wise in that overtime. That Milwaukee was able not only to withstand it on the road, but they withstood that and were able to pull away from Brooklyn just enough to get that win in overtime. I think it was sort of one of those, it's not a perfect series for Milwaukee, and they've got a lot to learn from. Hopefully that they will going against the Atlanta series, because that's a whole different ball game. But I think I'm satisfied with Milwaukee winning that series, especially since it's sort of, I mean, Joel, it landed in their lap. Like with the injuries, it landed right in their lap to be able to win. And like if Milwaukee lost that series, I thought that's definitely the end of Mike Budenholzer.
It absolutely should have been. Yeah. 100%. And I still have my doubts. And Atlanta, like you said, we're going to talk more about Atlanta, but their ability to attack you from multiple different angles means Milwaukee's not just going to have one guy to tee off on and try to, have other people beat them. And other people almost did beat them multiple times. I'll say this for Harden. I thought more or less he made the right play almost every time, offensively and defensively. The shots just weren't falling, as you said, so the box score is really deceiving. But I thought generally he gave everything that he could have and was great. And listen, this is all different if Kevin Durant's foot is behind the line by 1 inch.
Oh yeah,
Brooklyn wins the series, and it's all over. And Milwaukee did make a very good stand in overtime. They did. I will give the whole defensive unit of Milwaukee very big credit there. But I mean, Brooklyn played just as good a defense almost on the other end too, right?
Right.
So both teams played hard in that overtime, but
both teams played hard, man.
But yeah, we're talking about a tiptoe of a shoe as a difference. And here's the other thing, though, because you play that what if, and Brooklyn can feel like they're robbed, and it's no shade on Durant. I mean, Durant got them into overtime, right? Durant got them into overtime. Yes, he could have won the game, but they would have been out. But Brooklyn wouldn't have been in that position, and Milwaukee wouldn't have been in that position if Brook Lopez, with 6 seconds left to go in the game, had remembered how much time coming out of a timeout was left on the clock, right? They run that play, and instead of him hoisting a shot, which would have either been a make or at least a live ball situation to eat more time. And Milwaukee could have gotten the rebound and got it back. You never know what happens, or Brooklyn fumbles it or whatever, and could have eaten that time. Durant never would have even gotten that look if Lopez hadn't had that enormous brain fart. So there's a whole lot of what ifs, and Lopez, no one's going to remember that happened, but that would have been a lot of shade. I mean, that would have been some Bill Buckner level shade on him if Durant is behind the line and makes that three, and that's how it ends after all that.
All right. Well, so that's going to be I think that's going to be, Milwaukee's got a very boom or bust factor for them. And Atlanta's been very fun. Like Milwaukee's got, a multiple time MVP on their roster and a guy who has filled up the stat sheet for ever since the game 2 when they went down 2-0, kind of sort of putting the team on his back. Like, we can say that about Kevin Durant because he almost went for 50 both games. Mm-hmm. But based on just the box score and you need 35, 40 points a game that you're getting from Milwaukee. If not, you're getting blown out in these games.
Is Milwaukee the Bucks team that beat the Heat in 4 and just kicked their butts in every facet and looked phenomenal? Or are they, like you said, that team that stumbled through the Nets series and did just enough? They're going to have their hands full with the Hawks unless all of a sudden the Hawks' youth catches up to them and the moment catches up to them a little bit. But, I mean, we've been saying that for 2 rounds so far, and it hasn't yet. So maybe it won't.
Well, let's go out west where those finals are already happening. In fact, game 2 is tomorrow, by the way, between the Clippers and the Suns. The Suns with a huge game 1 victory against the Clippers without Chris Paul. Granted, the Clippers did not have Kawhi Leonard either. So the very... I don't know if you would say 1-for-1 kind of scenario, but if you just want to just lazily throw that out there, you can. You could say one big star was gone, one big star, and the Suns were able to win game 1 at home. Game 2, Joel, let me just go ahead and talk to you about it. Do you think the Suns game 2 a lot of the same?
Certainly. It's necessary. It's 100% necessary to get a lot of the same, or the Suns can't win. And I got to give credit to both teams. I said, and a lot of people said, as soon as Kawhi Leonard went down, that the Clippers were cooked against Utah. I don't know whether it was more Utah choking things away in classic Jazz fashion, or the Clippers rallying around Paul George stepping up big time, and other guys, Terrence Mann coming out of nowhere and playing exactly as they needed in game 6, and then in game 7 too as well. So I don't know which it was more, but the Clippers did their job. They got out of that series. They played the Suns really well for the most part. And you see the Clippers' depth, the ability to just bring in so many different veteran guys and have them be ready to play, that when they have that shot in the arm, when Paul George is playing with urgency, which he has now for 3 straight games because he's back to being the man, and when other guys, whether it be Reggie Jackson or Terrence Mann, stepping up and being able to provide that offensive punch, the Clippers are just as dangerous as we've talked about. On the flip side, the Suns were able to lose their identity maker, which is Chris Paul, and show
a great description of him,
and show that the student has learned that much from the teacher.
Wow.
Because they the energy, the youthful enthusiasm was awesome. The crowd was behind them, but they were just playing the right way almost the entire time, except at the very end when things got tight, Campaign started to lose his cool a little bit. And it looked like they were on the verge of an implosion just from some youthful frustration and from the moment getting a little big. And Monty Williams subs Campaign out, lets him cool down. I forget who he brought in for him instead. It may have been Torrey Craig.
I think it was Torrey Craig.
Or Cam Johnson. But, brings a sub in. The Suns settle back down. They got right back to being enthusiastic instead of frustrated. The backdoor cutting is phenomenal, which I've talked about for weeks now. The ability to move the ball. And then the fact that Devin Booker is truly making you pick your poison right now. Because you are either sending 2 and 3 guys at him to get the ball out of his hands, and he is making the right play to the right guy on time. Gee, who does that sound like? Chris Paul, right? And credit to all the other guys. They're receiving the ball on time and in the right spot, whether it's Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, DeAndre Ayton, and they are finishing the play. They're making the shots. Torrey Craig was 2 of 2 from downtown. That doesn't happen very often. But they were getting such good looks, and they were knocking them down, and they were feeding off the crowd. And if you don't send those 2 or 3 guys at Devin Booker, he's making the shot almost every single freaking time, and he's getting to the elbow for the shot. Gee, who does that sound like? It's Chris Paul, right? That's Chris Paul's sweet spot too. So they did a phenomenal job. Paul is supposedly symptom-free now on COVID stuff, so whether he can make it back tomorrow for Game 2, that might be a stretch. But certainly Game 3 is looking to be expected. The Suns got to be able to come out and not take their foot off the gas pedal. You got to amp up the crowd again. You got to run. You know the Clippers are going to make adjustments, but the Suns just have they've got some magic right now. They've got some moxie, and you just hope that the carpet ride keeps going for them.
So I think that's a great descriptor of Devin Booker or Chris Paul. It's been so long since you even said it. Of Devin Booker, it's very Chris Paul-esque for Game 1. Dude got his first career triple-double in Game 1. I think he had 13 rebounds, 11 assists, 40 points, by the way. Not bad. Not Chris Paul-esque, but not bad. Actually, it's better than Chris Paul. Usually when he's doing his triple-doubles, he's usually not going for 40. And it was very, very the student and the teacher, because it almost looked like if you didn't know what Chris Paul looked like, and you had only heard about the stats, and you only had heard about the way he played, and you only heard about how he makes the team better in every single way possible, you could have just said Devin Booker was Chris Paul. You could have said it. And the great thing about these playoffs is that Trae Young has had himself a breakout playoffs. Devin Booker has become known to a lot more people, I think, now because of this year playoff run. And he has been money this entire postseason. And Game 1 was huge for him. Just Kawhi Leonard or not. We can talk about Paul George in just a second. But Devin Booker was phenomenal in that game. I mean, DeAndre Ayton goes for 20 and 9, and that's good. That's fine. That's all he sort of needs to do in general.
He did his job
for this team to be successful. But you're right, the backdoor cutting is just chef's kiss. It's a well executed game plan, and I don't want to. This seems a little simple, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Remember the old Suns, the Paul Westphal Suns, right? They sort of had a system where the system was scoring, right? The Mike D'Antoni Suns, 7 seconds or less to scoring. This feels like a very similar, they've got a system and they've got a way that they play, and they can almost execute it against anybody because they are that proficient with it. But this is a much more organized around defensive team.
I'm glad you said that.
And it really kind of shows what this Phoenix Suns team can do, because they're one of the best in the league at just about, honestly, everything defensively.
And so much of that comes, again, from that youthful activity, smart activity, and that's where you give the credit to Monty Williams. He's harnessing these guys and making them pull in the same direction, but there's a lot of youthful energy to be able to pull. And yeah, it starts with defense. They swarm. They jump out at you. They jump on pick and rolls and then are able to recover very quickly. Obviously, you have Ayton, who's able to play above the rim, but Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder, they're kind of clones of one another. Bridges is a lot more athletic, but their ability to switch off of each other and to both be defensive stoppers is hugely helpful. Paul is still a plus defender. Booker has never been looked at as a plus defender. However, like James Harden and Kyrie Irving in their respective series, you saw that Booker can compete on the defensive end. He doesn't have to be a liability. And he's been a lot more locked in during these playoffs, and I think all year round, where, yeah, he's never going to be a great defender, and that's not his job. You're going to hide him on probably one of the weakest or second weakest guys out there. But he's got to stay home on that guy. He's got to be able to react during switches. He's got to be able to play the passing lane. And Booker has been able to do that. And then going down on the other end, you're right. Like the Suns become very, very dangerous once they're out in transition. Paul is the better ball handler when you talk about the comparison of them. Yeah, they filled similar roles. You know, Paul's ability to get into the lane is from that ball handling ability, and then he's got some stretch ability. And for Booker, it's the sheer stretch ability mixed with some very strong ball handling as well. So how they get to those same spots, a little bit different, but the effect is largely the same. And the ability of other guys then to adjust, and for Booker to be able to adjust without Paul there, those answer so many questions that we had about these Suns, similar to the Hawks, of would they be old enough, mature enough to be able to make these steps? And you go, look, both of those teams have some good veterans on them that have clearly been helpful. They've got very strong coaches that have been helpful, and they've got young guys that have been humble and hungry enough to take whatever they've been being taught, because it's clearly being put out there on the court and is being executed now.
Let me ask you about the four teams that are left, because I do want to ask you about Paul George. That may be sort of how we wrap it up after that. But how refreshing, and not only is it to have sort of four new faces sort of having a chance for this championship, but four teams with youth, a little bit, not just, I shouldn't say it feels
not so much for the Clippers, but
I was going to say strong superstar faces, and a lot of what they do isn't just throw up 43. It's like three of these four teams are pretty good defensively. So like I feel like because of that, I feel more confident that we're going to get two really strong conference finals, and I feel like also we're going to get almost. Doesn't matter which series we get for the NBA final. I feel like we're going to get a strong matchup final-wise too.
I think you're right on the money. And in addition to what you said, I'll pick up on something that Jeff Van Gundy pointed out. Almost all of these teams.
He's the one that's employed right now, right?
Yeah. Trot out strong mid-range scoring superstars. Chris Paul, mid-range superstar. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, that's where they do most of their damage. Yeah, they can shoot the three. Devin Booker, we know, is a three-point shooter, but a lot of his damage is coming into dribbling into that mid-range and knocking it down. Chris Middleton, mid-range scorer, right? And Atlanta, it's a little bit shakier. I think they shoot a little more from the outside. And Trae Young, not so much a mid-range scorer, but the floater game still gets into the mid-range, and that's where he's going to beat you if he gets you off the dribble. It's on that little running floater, which is coming out of, right inside the paint. So I think if you're a basketball purist, or if you're just somebody that was sick of seeing LeBron over and over, got sick of the Warriors and Cavs over and over, this is refreshing because it's new faces. It's familiar basketball in some ways because of that mid-range ability, but it's also that new wave of basketball that we've seen now for almost a decade. So it's not really new wave anymore. It just is what it is. But you're right. It's the ability to attack from multiple different levels. It's not Houston Rockets just chuck forever. When I watch the Suns, honestly, I see shades of what the Warriors did with the beautiful game. It's not, the Warriors were shooting more from outside, but the Warriors' ability to move the ball and find the right guy on time was really one of the just gorgeous and memorable things from that mini dynasty's run. It's why you wanted to watch them, besides the crazy shots that Curry would hit, or the fact that they could chuck up so many threes. The ball movement was phenomenal. And I see the Suns doing that even as they attack from different angles. It's so unselfish. It goes back to, the Spurs were like that, but they weren't as exciting. But it's just, if you're a basketball purist, it is being played the right way, and a team is getting rewarded by doing that.
I would like to say that in the Clippers game, there were 69 and 75 points scored in the second and third quarters, respectively. I don't expect that to be a trend in this series, because I expect much more what we saw in the first quarter, which was 42 points. I expect a lot more like low 100 scoring than sort of 115, 120 to 115 kind of type games.
With the Clippers not having Kawhi, though, anything is possible, I think.
Well, we did see that. It went from a 42-point quarter to a 69-point quarter to a 75-point third quarter. And I lost my under bet. So thanks, guys. Final thing I want to mention is sort of Paul George and the Clippers, just to sort of wrap up with them. At 58 points from two guys, 34 from Paul George. 58 of their 114 points came from two guys. And that was clearly not enough because they lost. Joel, they can't win like this. Do you, or I don't know. Let me ask you, do you think they can win like this? Because I don't think that they can expect to win if it's just you and Reggie Jackson going for great games.
Yeah, they're running out of cards to play. You think back to when Kawhi was healthy, and the thing we kept questioning about them was that over-reliance on Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to not only be their top two defenders, but then their top two scorers. And in games where they didn't have anybody else step up near or at least over 15 points, nearer to 20 points, a lot of those games where somebody wasn't even at that, they didn't have anybody else in double figures even. And you look at the other night, they get 11 points off the bench from DeMarcus Cousins, and he's the only other guy besides Jackson and George that was in double figures, period. So that
although he had a pretty nasty dunk. That was a pretty good dunk on his part.
I'm rooting for Cousins to be effective. I'm rooting for him to get more minutes.
By the way, did you see his reaction after he had that dunk? It was almost like, I'm in my prime. I don't even know why I'm only playing like 11 minutes. Like, come on, man. It was a prime DeMarcus Cousins play.
Absolutely.
To be fair,
but then he goes down on the other end and gets caught in pick and roll, and then you go, yep, that's why he's playing 13 minutes.
We get it. We got it after that.
So they're going to need Terrence Mann, not just to have the Terrence Mann game, but to have multiple games where he steps up and plays above being a rookie. And if I'm the Clippers, and I know they've experimented with this and it hasn't gone very well, I almost need to bring Mann off the bench. And I got to put one of the bigs, whether it's Zubats or Cousins, in the starting lineup and see how that goes and try to split up the scoring just a little bit. They've been so reliant on that starting five, and the starting five, got that huge shot in the arm from Terrence Mann when he came in, but really he was just filling what they were already getting from Kawhi Leonard offensively, at least. So they've got a lot of depth. Luke Kennard's got to play more minutes. He's got to be bigger, but you wonder about him defensively. And then you trot Rondo and Pat Beverly out there. Rondo had a really nice game, 8.7 assists, and hit a couple of big threes to keep the Clippers into it, just with no fear, no hesitation. He was 2 of 2. It was playoff Rondo, classic stuff in the fourth quarter to keep them in that. But they've got to find some other offensive contributors, and you might have to hide another non-scorer in the starting lineup and hope that Mann has one of those big games.
Yeah, I like what you brought about Luke Kennard, and I just have realized that he only played like 8 minutes in that game, mm-hmm. and I feel like I haven't seen him a ton this postseason, and especially making an impact. So I went back and
when he did play in the Utah series, he gave them a big lift.
So this is what I'm going back and sort of looking at. It's that against Utah, he played 9 minutes, 20 minutes, 12, 10. Did play a 29-minute game where he scored 18 points. But Luke Kennard's making a ton of money this year, isn't he?
Decent money. I think it's less. It's less about that money and more just the.
He signed a $64 million contract in December. Man,
and remember, he along with Bruce Brown were two of the mini building blocks in Detroit. Now, obviously, they were going to be in over their heads, but Kennard can play and Kennard can shoot. And if you're looking for offense, you're going to have to maybe give up something on that defensive end and get him out there for more minutes. So that would be an adjustment I would make, is maybe Mann and Kennard come off the bench together. Maybe Mann was put in the starting lineup so they could kind of switch off of each other and kind of, juggle those minutes between the two of them. I don't know. But the Clippers were able to get by against Utah, and it became part of their secret sauce back against Dallas to go small in the starting lineup. Because of DeAndre Ayton out there, I don't think you have to do that against the Suns. Now, granted, the Suns backdoor cutting and all the stuff with the pick and roll, I know why they're doing it, because they don't want DeMarcus Cousins or Zubats getting caught into that pick and pop, pick and roll situation with Devin Booker coming downhill, and that's what the Suns will hunt. But you may have to pick your poison there. I would at least get a bigger look at that and try it in game 2 and see if it even works.
Last question. You ready? For those who aren't watching, he's shaking his head. Yes, that's Joel is. Joel, Ty Lue, this is an amazing stat, is 12-1 when his team has a chance to clinch a series. And as we now know, it's not just a LeBron series. He's now able to do it with the Clippers too. Does he get a chance to go for 13-1 this series?
Yeah, I think he'll get a chance. These are evenly matched series. I think this one probably goes 6, maybe 7 games. My pick was the Clippers coming out of the West. It certainly is possible. But
so you're thinking they win it still at least 3?
Yeah, I think it's so much less likely without Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, these injuries have just decimated what you get to think about these playoffs, man. And it's odd that it's taken all these injuries to get us to a really fresh Final Four, like the conference finals of each. Like it's taken like a lot of dudes that getting out of the game, a lot of top flight guys to get to what no one was expecting. I mean, everyone's money was on like LeBron versus Kevin Durant and Kyrie for the championship this year. So the fact that all these injuries, including Kawhi just a handful of days ago, like it's hard to really know what to expect.
Absolutely. If Paul comes back and is 100% very quickly and they pick up where they left off, it could be a much shorter series than we think. Just as, if the Bucks go back and play the way they did against Miami, Atlanta doesn't really on paper have an answer for Giannis. But then again, Brooklyn wasn't supposed to have an answer for Giannis either. And if Atlanta is able to keep attacking from all sorts of different angles and Milwaukee underestimates them and kind of sleepwalks into it again, it could be short that way too. So I think both series will be long, but yeah, I've been wrong enough during these playoffs. It's been so unpredictable and fun because of that, that it's just honestly hard to say. I'll absolutely cop out on that.
Up until the Kawhi injury and Chris Paul's sort of COVID positive test, like the Final Four teams were basically the ones that made it throughout the playoffs healthiest. They did not have the huge injuries to sideline their stars from this game, and here we are. But
it changed so much in that second round, right? All of a sudden, the Nets get injured, and Paul goes down, and Kawhi's down, and the second round just totally different than the first.
I don't like you calling it the second round, Joel. It's the semis. It's the Western and Eastern Conference semifinals. In fact, the first round I would like for you to start referring to as the quarters. So
that I will not do. However, I will wrap up the George Ratkovitz episode. 65 is in the books, and as always, if you're listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, please come on over, check out the video version as well. Give us a like, a share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you're watching us on video and you need audio only, I just literally told you where you can find the rest of the show in its audio completion. So go ahead and do that.
People listen. Like if you're going to be on the podcast, listen to the podcast. Actually, listen to it. I don't care. You're probably listening to it like on the way to work or something, and completely forgotten everything we said. So that's fine. We're just here for your downloads. That's all. Joel, say goodbye to the good people.
Goodbye, good people, and we'll be back on Wednesday with the BbA Bite, which is in a very short time. We on purpose held off this episode instead of the usual Sunday taping because today nobody's playing, and it just made sense.
Yeah, and by the way, it's my first Father's Day. Relax.
Oh yeah, I guess that's two. Let's just make it about you.
I don't have to give you guys every single piece of me. Okay, jeez, relax, have fun, do something else. Yeah.